The world's best short stories. By transcription, the University of the Air presents Wakefield by Nathaniel Hawthorne, a strange tale of marital desertion.
In some old magazine or newspaper, I recollect a story told as truth of a man, let us call him Wakefield, who absented himself for a long time from his wife. Whenever any subject so forcibly affects the mind, time is well spent in thinking of it. If the listener choose, let him do his own meditation. Or if he prefer to ramble with me through the 20 years of Wakefield's vagary, I bid him welcome, trusting that there will be a pervading spirit and a moral, even should we fail to find them, done up neatly and condensed into the final sentence. Thought has always its efficacy, and every striking incident its moral. What sort of a man was Wakefield? We are free to shape out our own idea and call it by his name. He was now in the meridian of life. His matrimonial affections, never violent, were sobered into a calm, habitual sentiment. Of all husbands, he was likely to be the most constant because of a certain sluggishness which would keep his heart at rest wherever it might be placed. He was intellectual, but not actively so. His mind occupied itself in long and lazy musings that tended to no purpose or had not vigor to attain it. His thoughts were seldom so energetic as to seize hold of words. Imagination, in the proper meaning of the term, made no part of Wakefield's gifts. With a cold, but not depraved nor wandering heart, and a mind never feverish with riotous thoughts nor perplexed with originality, who could have anticipated that our friend would entitle himself to a foremost place among the doers of eccentric deeds? Had his acquaintances been asked who was the man in London the surest to perform nothing today which should be remembered on the morrow, they would have thought of Wakefield. Only the wife of his bosom might have hesitated. She, without having analyzed his character, was partly aware of a quiet selfishness that had rusted into his inactive mind, of a peculiar sort of vanity, the most uneasy attribute about him, of a disposition to craft which had seldom produced more positive effects than the keeping of petty secrets hardly worth revealing, and lastly, of what she called a little strangeness sometimes in the good man. This latter quality is indefinable and perhaps non-existent. Let us now imagine Wakefield bidding adieu to his wife. He tells her not to expect him positively by the return coach, nor to be alarmed should he tarry 3 or 4 days, but at all events to look for him at supper on Friday night. Wakefield himself, be it considered, had no suspicion of what is before him. He holds out his hand. She gives her own and meets his parting kiss in the matter-of-fact way of a 10 years' matrimony. And forth goes the middle-aged Mr. Wakefield, almost resolved to perplex his good lady by a whole week's absence. We must hurry after him along the street ere he lose his individuality and melt into the great mass of London life. It would be vain searching for him there. Let us follow close at his heels, therefore, until after several superfluous turnings and doublings, we find him comfortably established by the fireside of a small apartment. He is in the next street to his own, and at his journey's end. He can scarcely trust his good fortune in having not got hither unperceived, recollecting that at one time he was delayed by the throng in the very focus of a lighted lantern, and again there were footsteps that seemed to tread behind his own, distinct from the multitudinous tramp around him. And now he heard a voice shouting afar and fancied that it was calling his name. Doubtless a dozen busybodies had been watching him and told his wife the whole affair. Poor Wakefield! Little knowest thou thine own insignificance in this great world. No mortal eye but mine has traced thee. Go quietly to thy bed, foolish man, and on the morrow, if thou wilt be wise, get thee home to good Mrs. Wakefield, and tell her the truth. Remove thyself not even for a week from thy place in her chaste bosom. Were she for a single moment to deem thee dead or lost or lastingly divided from her, thou wouldst be woefully conscious of a change in thy true wife forever after. It is perilous to make a chasm in the human affections, not that they gape so long and wide, but so quickly closing again. Almost repenting of his frolic, or whatever it may be termed, Wakefield lies down betimes. In the morning he rises earlier than usual and sets himself to consider what he really means to do. Such are his loose and rambling modes of thought that he has taken this very singular step with the consciousness of a purpose indeed, but without being able to define it sufficiently for his own contemplation. The vagueness of the project and the convulsive effort with which he plunges into the execution of it are equally characteristic of a feeble-minded man. Wakefield shifts his ideas, however, as minutely as he may, and finds himself curious to know the progress of matters at home, how his exemplary wife will endure her widowhood of a week, and briefly, how the little sphere of creatures and circumstances in which he was a central object will be affected by his removal. A morbid vanity, therefore, lies nearest the bottom of the affair. But how is he to attain his ends? Not certainly by keeping close in this comfortable lodging, where, though he slept and awoke in the next street to his home, he is as effectually abroad as if the stagecoach had been whirling him away all night. Yet should he reappear, the whole project is knocked in the head. His poor brains being hopelessly puzzled with this dilemma, he at length ventures out, partly resolving to cross to the head of the street and send one hasty glance toward his forsaken domicile. Habit takes him by the hand and guides him, wholly unaware, to his own door, where, just at the critical moment, he is aroused by the scraping of his foot upon the step. "Wakefield, whither art thou going?" At that instant his fate was turning on the pivot. Little dreaming of the doom to which his first backward step devotes him, he hurries away, breathless with agitation hitherto unfelt, and hardly dares turn his head at the distant corner. Right glad is his heart, though his brain be somewhat dizzy, when he finds himself by the coal fire of his lodgings. So much for the commencement of this long whim-wham. After the initial conception and the stirring up of the man's sluggish temperament to put it into practice, the whole matter evolves itself in a natural train. We may suppose him, as the result of deep deliberation, buying a new wig of reddish hair and selecting sundry garments in a fashion unlike his customary suit of brown from an old clothes bag. It is accomplished. Wakefield is another man. The new system being now established, a retrograde movement to the old world would be almost as difficult as the step that placed him in this unparalleled position. Furthermore, he is rendered obstinate by a sulkiness occasionally incident to his temper and brought on at present by the inadequate sensation which he conceives to have been produced in the bosom of Mrs. Wakefield. He will not go back until she be frightened half to death. Well, twice or thrice has she passed before his sight, each time with a heavier step, a paler cheek and more anxious brow. And in the third week of his non-appearance he detects a portent of evil entering the house in the guise of an apothecary. Next day the knock is muffled. Toward nightfall comes the chariot of a physician and deposits its bewigged and solemn burden at Wakefield's door, whence, after a quarter of an hour's visit, he emerges, perhaps the herald of a funeral. Dear woman, will she die? No. In the course of a few weeks she gradually recovers. The crisis is over. Her heart is sad, perhaps, and quiet, and let him return soon or late, it will never be feverish for him again. Such ideas glimmer through the mist of Wakefield's mind, and render him indistinctly conscious that an almost impassable gulf divides his hired apartment from his former home. "It is in but the next street," he sometimes says. Fool! It is in another world. Hitherto he has put off his return from one particular day to another. Henceforward he leaves the precise time undetermined, not tomorrow, probably next week, pretty soon. Poor man. The dead have nearly as much chance of revisiting their earthly homes as the self-banished Wakefield. Would that I had a folio to write instead of an article of a dozen pages. Then might I exemplify how an influence beyond our control lays its strong hand on every deed which we do, and weaves its consequences into an iron tissue of necessity. Wakefield is spellbound. We must leave him for 10 years or so to haunt around his house without once crossing the threshold, and to be faithful to his wife with all the affection of which his heart is capable, while he is slowly fading out of hers. Long since, it must be remarked, he has lost the perception of singularity in his conduct. After 10 years' separation, Wakefield chances to meet his wife in the street. The throng eddies away and carries them asunder. The sober widow, resuming her former pace, proceeds to church, but pauses in the portal and throws a perplexed glance along the street. She passes in, however, opening her prayer book as she goes. And the man, with so wild a face that busy and selfish London stands to gaze after him, he hurries to his lodgings, bolts the door, and throws himself upon the bed. The latent feelings of years break out. His feeble mind acquires a brief energy from their strength. All the miserable strangeness of his life is revealed to him at a glance, and he cries out passionately, "Wakefield, Wakefield, you are mad." Perhaps he was so. The singularity of his situation must have so molded him to itself that, considered in regard to his fellow creatures in the business of life, he could not be said to possess his right mind. He had contrived, or rather, he had happened to dissever himself from the world, to vanish, to give up his place and privileges with living men without being admitted among the dead. Yet, changed as he was, he would seldom be conscious of it, but deem himself the same man ever. Glimpses of the truth indeed would come, but only for a moment, and still he would keep saying, "I shall go back soon," nor reflect that he had been saying so for 20 years. One evening in the 20th year since he vanished, Wakefield is taking his customary walk toward the dwelling which he still calls his own. It's a gusty night of autumn, with frequent showers that patter down upon the pavement and are gone before a man can put up his umbrella. Pausing near the house, Wakefield discerns through the parlor windows of the second floor the red glow and glimmer and fitful flash of a comfortable fire. On the ceiling appears the grotesque shadow of good Mrs. Wakefield. The cap, the nose and chin and broad waist form an admirable caricature, which dances, moreover, with the up-flickering and down-sinking blaze, almost too merrily for the shadow of an elderly widow. At this moment, a shower chances to fall, and is driven by the unmannerly gust full into Wakefield's face and bosom. He is quite penetrated with its autumnal chill. Shall he stand wet and shivering here with his own hearth, when his own hearth has a good fire to warm him, and his own wife will run to fetch the gray coat and small clothes, which doubtless she had kept carefully in the closet of their bedchamber? No, Wakefield is no fool. He ascends the steps heavily, for 20 years have stiffened his legs since he came down, but he knows it not. "Stay, Wakefield. Would you go to the sole home that has left you? Then step into your grave." The door opens. As he passes in, we have a parting glimpse of his visage and recognize the crafty smile which was the precursor of the little joke he has ever since been playing off at his wife's expense. How unmercifully has he quizzed the poor woman. Well, a good night's rest to Wakefield. This happy event, supposing it to be such, could only have occurred at an unpremeditated moment. We will not follow our friend across the threshold. He has left us much food for thought, a portion of which shall lend its wisdom to a moral and be shaped into a figure. Amid the seeming confusion of our mysterious world, individuals are so nicely adjusted to a system, and systems to one another and to the whole, that by stepping aside for a moment, a man exposes himself to a fearful risk of losing his place forever. Like Wakefield, he may become, as it were, an outcast of the universe.
By transcription, the University of the Air has just presented Wakefield by Nathaniel Hawthorne, another of the world's best short stories.
Next week I'll bring you the story of The Man from Red Dog by Alfred Henry Lewis. It's a wild and woolly tale of the Old West, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Be listening then, won't you?
The World's Best Short Stories has been a transcribed presentation of the University of Illinois Radio Service.